Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Book Review Blog. I am your book reviewer, and today we're going to review the book Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. If you remember my last review of Bag of Bones, I explained that I got a new Kindle for Christmas, and Little Women is the first book that I decided to read on my Kindle, so that was a fun experience. I'd really never read a book like electronically like that before, so let's get started. It's a Little Women is what's known as a coming of age story. It has a plot, but it's not and it connects, but it's not really like there's a problem or a conflict, and they're doing the book to solve it. But it starts with the March sisters. There are four of them. There is Margaret March, whose name is Meg in the book. At the beginning of the book, she is 16. There's Josephine, or they call her Jo. She is 15 or 14. There is Elizabeth, they call her Beth. She is 12. And then lastly, there's Amy, and she is about 10. So, like I said, there's not really a plot, but it does follow their lives. It starts in Christmas of, I believe, 1860 or 61. I would imagine 61, because before, when I knew about this book, I knew that it was taken during wartime, but since they lived in New England, I had thought that it was the Revolutionary War, but it was actually the Civil War. Their father is away fighting the Civil War. So, at the beginning of the book, as I said, it's Christmas, and they're really kind of sad that their father isn't with them, and they decide to instead of buying gifts for themselves, they decide to purchase gifts for other family members in their area who their fathers are also at war, and they are less fortunate than they are. The Marches aren't really rich. They're not rich, but they're not poor. But they're kind of leaning more towards the poor side than rich. But the matriarch of the family is their mother, who you don't really know. Her name is Margaret as well, but you don't really know that. She's just called Mrs. March in the book, so it must be mentioned a couple of times that her actual name is Margaret. But and then it picks up further along the way. There are minor characters along. There's probably the biggest minor character is the neighbor of the Marches, the Lawrence family. It's a grandfather and a grandson. The grandson his first name is Theodore, but in the book he is called Laurie, and he's in his age is between Meg's and Joe's, but he really becomes friends with Joe and Beth. Especially, like, Joe is kind of a tomboy at heart, and she kind of plays with him, like they kind of flirt back and forth, and Laurie's like, I'm gonna make you my wife someday, and Joe's like, nope, you're not going to. I'm not getting married. That's not right for me, just kind of thing. I don't ever want to get married. And that's kind of their thing all through the book, is that Laurie pursues her, but Joe refuses him much of the time. There is also Beth, who you learn through the book also has feelings for Laurie, and Laurie doesn't really respond to them, but she's not heartbroken. She's just really into her sisters and just wants so much for the best of them, and and then as the story progresses, or as the book progresses, you learn more of the sisters' personalities comes out. Meg, being the oldest, worked as a governess for a family, and eventually Lori is tutored by a man named John Brooke, and Meg falls in love with John, and they end up getting married and having twins. Actually, that was kind of cute. And Jo grows up and she really likes to read and she really likes to write, so she becomes an author. I read somewhere that Little Women was somewhat autobiographical, so I imagine that Louisa May Alcott wrote Jo for herself. That maybe she saw herself in Jo a lot and made Jo a writer like she did. And Amy, the youngest March, is very autistic, and she ends up as she grows up, she ends up leaving America and goes to France to pursue her art, and she goes with a family friend, and she lives there through most of her adult life, and she's really prominent with her art and very successful, and that leaves Beth. Meg marries early and moves away, still in the same area, but then Amy, again, when she grows up, she moves even further to France. So Jo and Beth are together, and their sisterly bond is much greater than any of the other ones. And Beth is just very quiet and very sensitive, and like I said, she just wants everything for her sisters, and they don't really say what she wants exactly out of her life. She's just kind of happy-go-lucky. But one thing to know about Beth is that she's very frail. She's very quiet, and there was a time when there was another family that Jo was being a governess to called the Hummels, and it was a cold day, and Jo really didn't want to go to them and be with them, so Beth decided to do that, and so she was with them and took care of them for kind of a while, for maybe a week or so, and then later on it was learned that 3 of the Hummel kids, I don't remember how many they had, but 3 of the Hummel kids had died of scarlet fever, and Beth had contracted scarlet fever, and Jo felt incredibly guilty because Beth did not need to be there. That was Jo's responsibility, but she didn't want to do that, so then that's part of where their sisterly bond, which was already strong, began to really grow, because Jo just felt incredibly sorry and incredibly guilty that Beth had to go through this illness. She did overcome the illness, but that left her very frail, even more frail than as I already described. And most of the time throughout the rest of the book that you encounter Beth, she's lying on her sofa. So she really never does anything outside of the home. She lives at the home and is just proceeds to get sick. And I had known, actually this is kind of funny, I had known from a Friends episode that Beth had eventually died, and so I knew that was going to happen. But yeah, it was very sad, and I thought that this thing with scarlet fever was going to end up killing her, but that was kind of in the middle of the book, and I would feel sad if Beth was not prevalent in the end of the story. But I like how Louisa May Alcott did it, where she kept her alive from the scarlet fever, but yet that made her sicker and sicker, and then she eventually died, and that was very sad. And then it kind of ends again. Well, they're older. They're not old women, but they're older, and eventually, Laurie catches up with Amy in France, and they develop a relationship, and eventually they get married. And then that leaves Joe, who still did not want to be married, but her sisters were, and her family were saying, you've got to get married. You don't want to become an old maid. Again, this is 1800, so an old maid to them is like 30. And so they kind of force or push this newcomer. He's a German immigrant. His name is Professor Bear. And he's not really rich, but Joe is like, if I'm going to get married, I don't want to be married for money. And so they spend time with each other, and they do eventually get married. So all the three sisters who remain at the end of the book are all married, and Meg has 2 children because I said she has twins. Amy has a daughter who she names Beth, and eventually I think Joe is going to have children too. At the end of the book, Joe opens a house for boys. I'm not sure if that's where the sequel Little Men starts, because I know that there's 2 sequels, sort of, to Little Women. There's Little Men, and then there's Joe's Boys. So I'm sure Joe's Boys is more prevalent, but hopefully I'll look forward to maybe reading Little Men at some point, and maybe Joe's Boys. I enjoyed the book. I'm glad that I read it. A lot of people I know read Little Women as little girls themselves, so I just was not fortunate enough to do that. So anyway, my next book that I'm going to read is a sequel to The Hunger Games. I'd also gotten the second and third book for Christmas, so this is the second one. There you go. Catching Fire. So I bid you farewell and happy reading.